Well, it is
Well,
daylight savings, so we're a day late. That's all.
we're just a day late. It's Saturday. It's Saturday night.
It's Saturday night with daylight savings. So,
It's so funny. One of the reasons we didn't podcast yesterday is because I did a big bike ride and I couldn't sleep well last night. And one of the reasons I couldn't sleep well, we were supposed to meet for breakfast with some people at 8 a.m. And I'm like, oh, the time change.
yeah.
I was a day off.
Oh,
You know how you're so kind of pseudo asleep. You're like, well, I did something big on Saturday. I got to do something big on Sunday, and I was like, oh, it's the time change. What time is it? Marie woke up to early, and I look over. What time is it? And she's like, oh, it's 6. And I'm like, this is new time, and she's
yeah.
like,
Wait, what real time is that? Yeah,
she's like, that's not till tomorrow. I'm like,
all right.
oh, I've been stressing about this as I've been
Yeah.
trying to sleep.
Well, it's so funny. My wife gives me a hard time. I don't do well with thinking time zones. So, especially when you cross the international date line,
Oh
that just
yeah.
I just can't, when we've gone to Japan and in New Zealand, it's just like once you cross that international date line, I have to pull out an app and I need to look and see,
Yeah.
wait, is what's today and is that tomorrow or is that yesterday? So,
And it's funny, right? Your mind works like that, but what's happening to your body?
yeah, totally. Yeah. Oh, now we're going to go down a
We're
circadian
not, because
rhythm.
we'll talk about when we start traveling again internationally to race. Then we're gonna have an awesome talk on
Yeah.
circadian rhythms.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was very very astute as far as daylight saving time and us meeting on a Saturday. And thanks for switching stuff around.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
we were in Death Valley yesterday, and the service there is horrible. And so I was like, well, let's just meet. And honestly,
Hmm.
I was in no shape to have a podcast last night at 6 o'clock after 6.5 hours on my bike.
Well, we were running around. We were doing lots of different things yesterday afternoon, anyhow. So it all worked out. So
Awesome. Awesome. Well, let's tonight we're actually we I can't believe we've done over 100 of these podcasts and we have not talked about bonking yet.
I know. Well,
And well,
did
not in
you?
so many terms. We talked about fueling.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Go
And
ahead.
did you see the race over the weekend with all the DNFs? Was that Crash Daytona?
I actually was it today
Oh,
or yesterday?
Clash Daytona, I think,
Was it
not
today
Crash.
or yesterday?
Yesterday because there was people were dropping like flies. Well, the pro race. I think the age
Okay.
group race is on a different day.
Okay. So I was off the grid for a day.
Yeah.
So I didn't see. I mean, I follow a few people on Strava, a few pros on Strava, and I saw like good results, but they were
Yeah.
elite pros.
Yeah, right. Well, there's, the pros were dropping out,
Was it heat?
heat and humidity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
bonking.
So it's so interesting, John, because that's kind of, I guess it's an overlying theme of in racing. What is it that ultimately takes you from this pace you're at to dump, right? Like where you're on pace in, let's say, an Ironman for a 3:30 marathon, and instead
Yeah.
you end up at a 4:30 marathon,
Yeah.
right? Or like what is it? And this is the fun part about this one, right? It's
I know.
multifactorial.
I know. Well, okay, so Bob's helping us out here. He posted it's Miami. I said Crash Miami. I like that name better, by the
I
way.
like Crash Miami too. Especially a bunch of people crashed out basically. Well, I mean, not
Yeah,
crash, but
and
yeah.
he says it was 90 degrees with 70% humidity, which that's just brutal. I mean, that's hard. And so, yeah, so what?
Especially this time of year,
Yeah,
right?
right,
Because everyone's
right.
been training in like Europe and North America.
Hmm.
That's a even if you've been training on the West Coast,
Well,
we
and
we
what's
don't have that.
odd, in the running world, your key marathon endurance races are either in the spring or the fall, at least for our climate.
Yeah, they trying to shoot around between 55 and 65 degrees is their
Yeah,
goal. But
yeah,
triathlon, like, oh, let's just find the hottest,
I
most
know.
miserable places and let's have you race. Like even Kona, right?
Yeah,
Let's literally find the worst place
yeah,
for weather
yeah,
you'd ever want to do an endurance event. Let's make it as hot as possible,
yeah,
humid and windy.
yeah, yeah.
And it
Or
probably will, it might rain a little bit too.
yeah, right, 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 right. Yeah, bomb cyclone. But yeah,
But they
last year
would
was
never
Coeur
do that.
d'Alene.
Yeah. But they would never do that in major marathoning.
No, no. And that's because that environment plays such a big role in temperature regulation, but then also just the dynamics of being able to take fuel in because you're getting so hot that it's hard to do anything. Your body's trying to circulate that blood in a way to try to cool things down, and it's really not worrying about digestion at that point.
Yeah, good luck bringing on
Yeah,
carbohydrates,
yeah,
at any given rate when literally your number one job of your brain is saying, cool me down.
yeah, right, right.
Number two is, I want to go fast.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about bonking, one of the overarching things, and this is, off of the reading that I've done, and in preparing for this, and this is, I think we know, is there's two main things, right? It's pacing incorrectly,
Mm-hmm.
fueling incorrectly,
Yeah.
right? And when you think about this race in Clash Miami, it's the same thing in heat, right?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't fuel properly, maybe, or hydrate properly, and you overpaced yourself.
Yeah.
If you overheat in a race, it's easy to blame it's so easy to blame the temperature. Oh, it's 90 degrees and 70% humidity. Well, if you would have went 10% slower, you'd have
Mm-hmm.
produced less heat
Yeah.
internally, and your gastrointestinal system would have been working a little bit better, and that you wouldn't have bonked out of the race,
Yeah.
right? And that's the same for example in Coeur d'Alene.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to lots of people that raced Coeur d'Alene last year.
Mm-hmm.
Some that were successful, some that were not successful. The ones that weren't successful blamed the heat.
Yeah.
The ones that were successful altered their pacing
Mm-hmm.
to the day that presented them.
Right, right.
And that's a really hard thing to do in this world of, I got to set a PR every time I race.
Mm-hmm. No, no, that for sure. And you're right. It's as you exercise and as you exercise harder, the amount of heat you builds up faster. And then you're also trying to get your fuel, and you mentioned the hydration as well. I mean, really, you've got that combination that you have to maintain all of those in order to be successful in that environment, and even any environment. I mean, even that's why, even with New York Marathon or Boston Marathon, I mean, those are classic races that are November or in the spring, and you still get hot in those. I mean, you see the, especially the elite runners still running in a race singlet and shorts, because you're building up a lot of heat, but you still need to fuel and get to that finish line.
Yeah. Yeah. So, if you think about it, any given race, the, in my opinion, in planning for a race, is number one is to avoid this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because doesn't matter how good your training was going into this, right? You could have had the best 12-week block of your career. If you overpace and or under fuel,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna bonk.
Yeah.
One way or the other. You're either gonna overheat or you're gonna underutil or not have enough calories.
Mm-hmm.
It's inevitable that it will happen.
So we both read a couple of papers prepping for this,
Yep.
and I wrote down the definition of bonking
Yeah.
that Smith had. Did you pick up on that as well?
Well, I actually took all of the pieces as far as the models.
Okay, okay. So
So you talk about that
let's
one.
let's define bonking,
Yeah.
and then we also need to define hitting the wall, which sometimes, I mean, people look at both of these terms as sort of, badges of honor. It's like, yeah, I bonked, or yeah, I hit the wall at this place or this place. And so Smith, in 2021, in his paper, he defined bonking as the sudden onset of debilitating fatigue that can occur at a race. I
Yep.
like that. It's debilitating. It
It
is
is debilitating.
debilitating. You can barely continue, maybe not continue at all.
Well, if you think about it, if you get to the point where you don't have enough fuel,
Hmm.
we have sensors in our brain that are going to say, you know what, I need fuel. The brain needs fuel. Number one, my organs need fuel. I don't care how fast you want to run.
Hmm.
You're going to slow down
Yeah.
because I'm going to prioritize my life and your survival over everything else. And is it over exaggerated? The research says, yeah, it is,
Hmm.
that you actually can keep going for a certain amount of time before you actually would, pass out and die or whatever. But ultimately, it's It's not something you can run through,
Hmm.
right? Like it will slow you down.
Well, we have the classic stories in Iron Man of crawling, Julie Moss and,
Yeah.
Paula Newby Frazier, and they're crawling across the finish line. And, it's not hard to find videos of any, marathons and iron distance events where you're seeing these people collapse or just struggle to get across that finish line because of this hitting the wall and bonking. And it's obviously a complicated matter, but it's these turn into iconic moments. I mean, how many people were really motivated to go do Ironman after watching Julie Moss
Yeah.
crawl across the finish line in her Ironman event.
Or even, more recently with, the Sarah True story, right? Of
Sarah
her
True, yeah,
collapsing
yeah,
twice
yeah.
in a race, and, and blaming, once again, like, I don't know her, but blaming heat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, are you blaming the heat, or are you blaming your pacing
Yeah, right, right.
and your fueling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is such a relevant topic to talk about, because you're right, it is an iconic thing. And and I also think that we in triathlon, once again, and I've talked about this many times, we're so like crazy in
Mm-hmm.
that we think, oh, it's just, I just did an Olympic
Yeah,
distance.
right.
Okay, so the elites are going just under 2 hours, right? that's that's like a marathon for everybody else.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
elites in marathon are going around the same distance,
yeah,
same time.
yeah.
And so, and it's, oh yeah, that's just an Olympic distance. You can bonk in an Olympic distance triathlon, I can tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then we start thinking about 70.3 racing, and you've got average finish times around 6 hours.
Yeah, right.
Like, and think about, almost all the research on bonking is done in marathoning,
Mm-hmm.
which average finish time in a marathon is 4 hours and 10 minutes or
Yeah.
so, right? So now we're extending that another hour and 15 minutes, and then let's not even talk about an Ironman, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking average finish times in the 13s, I think, if
Yeah,
you look at
yeah,
all of them.
yeah.
You're talking about 13 hours of doing stuff, and there's very little actual research on bonking in triathlon.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Yeah.
other thing in triathlon I think is super interesting is, and we can talk about Ironman to start with, but if you're a slowish swimmer, let's say you're a 130 swimmer, you don't get fuel for an hour and 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
No running race would ever do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's a half marathon. For a decent half marathoner, they're going to take in 2 gels, maybe 3 gels,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So we're setting ourselves up in triathlon basically to bonk with having
Mm-hmm.
an extended swim to begin with.
Yeah, no, that's really that's a good way of looking at it and sort of putting it in a context. Okay, so the other term that we've thrown around and that's closer to this term bonking is hitting the wall.
Yeah.
And this is the other paper we read by Boom and colleagues in 2008.
Yeah.
And what I liked about that, they did a survey of runners, and I'm drawing a blank on how many it was, but it was a big group. And they asked basically, what hitting the wall meant, what the
Yeah.
sensations were. And some of the ones that we're talking about now, generalized fatigue, unintentional slowing of pace, lightheadedness, desire to walk, shifting focus to surviving the race. So these are all, terms and phrases that are used to characterize this phenomena of hitting the wall, which is bonking and hitting the wall are pretty much used synonymously.
So, John, have you ever felt this? You have personal experience on this? No, seriously.
I don't know if you saw the post I made on Facebook. I actually included my iconic photo of from finisher pics that caught me hunched over at Ironman Boulder. It was literally like mile 23, and I was going one way, Laura was going the other way, and we ran into each other. And I just remember I don't even know if I can finish.
And
So
then think about it, you're 95% of the way there.
I know I'm 2 miles
Right.
away. You think you can, oh, 2 miles, it's just 2 miles, but and that's it. It's the desire to walk and shifting focus to survive the race. And that's really what I was doing. But it is interesting how, if you do look at my finisher pics for that race, I was running the finish line shoot. So
Right. So like, how's that possible?
yeah, that's
You
right.
got to this point where you've degraded yourself so much you
Yeah,
had to walk.
yeah,
But as soon as that carpet, right, as soon
yeah,
as you see
right.
that finish line,
Yeah.
how do you do that?
No, and and this is where, and I know we talked right before I said I got to hit start on the podcast because we started going down this path of talking about these different models. Well, okay, so there's this other term, fatigue.
Yeah, that is such a good question, right? Like when we start reading this, what is fatigue?
It's the F word in research. That's how I tell my students. And I was drawn to fatigue when I first started getting into research because you want to minimize fatigue or you want to prevent fatigue. You can't prevent it, you can minimize it. And it's a term that we all throw around, but what is the definition of fatigue?
No, it is such a good question, right? Like if you were just to ask anyone, like
Yeah.
not racers, not
Mhm.
just go on the street, hey, what's fatigue? Oh, it's when I feel tired and
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
accomplish the tasks
Yep.
at hand, right?
Yep.
I need a nap, or I need
Hmm.
fatigue means I need to sleep,
Yeah.
right? That's what the layperson says, but in research and in biomechanics research and physiology research and
Hmm.
athletic training research, it's completely different, right?
Yeah.
It's
Or it's more of a niche
niche
definition
for that
because
specialty.
yeah, no, exactly. Because it's funny if you look up in Tabor's Medical Dictionary, which is like a super technical reference, which is fantastic. Got me through my master's and my PhD, especially my physiology and any chemistry class. Uh, the definition is a general tiredness. And so, okay, well now the term that a lot of people get confused with though with fatigue is exhaustion.
Yeah.
And exhaustion is a different term, and that's a special term for when you cannot continue. You're exhausted, you're done, you stop exercising. Fatigue is a process that ultimately leads to exhaustion. And then you're spot on. I mean, if you go into a kinesiology department like ours and you bring the exercise physiologist on this discussion, you say, hey, how do you define fatigue operationally? They'll say, well, it has to do with fuel source or cardiovascular system or lactate, which we don't say
heart
that
rate,
that
heart
often
rate
anymore.
drift.
Yeah.
There's lots, right? Like
Yeah.
stroke volume
Yeah.
going down, stroke rate going up. Like there's so many. Yeah. In the biomechanics world, how do you define it?
We would say it's a decreasing ability to generate force, which obviously goes hand in hand with the cardiovascular system. So it's still, but we can measure the amount of force that's being generated, and we can see a degradation of force over
Would you
time.
also maybe use like the term efficiency in there, right? Like as you're fatigued, you can look at biomechanically, someone's running not as efficiently.
Yeah, no, that's good, and I like that way of describing it. I also use the term, economical at that point. Efficiency from a biomechanics, that's a tough term because we got to know internal work and external work, and sometimes we can't get both of those. We can get one and not the other. So we end up using a term a little softer of, economy type of thing.
So
But then if we get our psychologist in the room,
you're
even
gonna
our
get a different answer.
you're getting a totally different answer, and they're gonna say it's more of a feeling or a sensation. And I my dissertation was on fatigue and understanding fatigue, and I actually did end up settling on a psychological definition of fatigue, which is it's a perception of how much more you can do.
Yeah. So let me give you another one to think about.
Mhm.
And so we have a former student of ours. He works for the Arizona Diamondbacks. He's
Okay.
the athletic trainer for them. And he came and guest lectured a few weeks ago for us. And I knew this, but I didn't really put these pieces together. But he said that when they're either practicing or when they're playing, they measure the release velocity of the ball for every single pitch.
Hmm.
And when they see the release velocity get to a certain percentage of the maximum velocity, they're fatigued and they come out of the
Yeah,
game,
I love it.
right?
Yeah.
The athlete doesn't even perceive they're fatigued yet,
No, that's
right?
right.
So they're measuring something external
Hmm.
that's coming from something internal. There's no psychologic thing going on there,
Hmm.
right? Because the guy, the manager goes out to the mound and say, "Hey, you got the hook?" No, I'm good. right?
Yeah.
Well, no,
Right.
you've decreased your exit velocity on your pitch is went
Yeah.
down 5%. So you're done.
Hmm.
And so that's another side of it, right? It's just purely performance.
As objective as possible.
As
Yeah.
objective as we have a radar gun on your hand
Hmm.
and or on the ball, and we're looking at that. And it's interesting in your training runs. You
Hmm.
see this too, right? Especially on people with their long run days.
Hmm.
You can see mile after mile degradation if
Yeah.
if everything else is equal, right?
Right. Right.
Now, I'm not saying if they had a prescribed run where they were going to try and get faster and faster and faster, but if you said,
Hmm.
hey, go run 20 miles, hold a consistent pace,
Yeah.
most people can't do it.
Hmm.
And even if they're really well trained, they might near the end, they'll still be tapering off to a certain
Yeah.
extent. And it might not even be a psychologic advantage, just physiologically, they can't produce the power.
No, that's great, and I like that objective, look at pitch velocity or exit velocity of the ball from the hand, because that is very objective. Well, that's what that paper did. The other paper we did that we looked at, the Smith paper, single author paper that looked at over 4 million race
4 million. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean this is big data. I mean
This
this is
is
big
huge.
data,
How
and
many
that
marathons was it? Like 50 different marathons over several
I
years?
didn't write that down, but it probably was. I remember the
It looks like
table.
about 30 or 40 different marathons.
Yeah, it was a
But it
long
was over
list.
multiple years. For like for New York, for example, they had 2006 through
Yeah,
2019,
yeah,
564,000 participants. Well, these
yeah,
weren't participants; they were just taking the data.
yeah. Well, and I mean this is what's so cool. I mean nowadays we have this access to more and more data that are published on websites and programs like Strava or Connect or whatever it is. And so, yeah, this researcher got 4 million race records, and I think 2,743,322 unique runner data sets. Because some runners showed up in multiple races. Like obviously, you qualify for Boston, you're going to show up in the Boston record as well as in the qualifying race type of record. But yeah, these were big, big marathons too. Chicago, New York, Boston. Are you looking at the list? What are some of
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. It's everywhere. Mexico, Moscow,
yeah.
Oslo, Paris, Prague, Rome, Rotterdam. It's everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. And so this guy got 4 million race records and started analyzing, just as you were talking about here, the pace over time.
Yeah. Well, and it was pace over time, but it was also pace compared to PRs.
Yeah, yeah.
Pace compared to the beginning of the race. So they measured
Hmm.
kilometer 5 through kilometer 20,
Hmm.
and then 5 kilometer segments after that.
Right.
And the thing that I found super interesting is in these 4 million data points, when you added women and men together, it was around 30% of the people hit the wall as defined by basically having a significant amount of decrease in performance in the back half of the race that
That's right.
cost them on average 30 minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, think about that. 30% of the people
Hmm.
had this huge drop off because 30 minutes is a lot of time.
Yeah, right, right.
Right. And so this is a real thing. And once again, this is marathoners, and they were, they had everyone like out to like 5-6 hours.
Hmm.
I would love to see a data set like this done on Ironman run times.
I think that would be really cool. And I know there's some sophisticated websites out there that have looked at a lot of data in the different iron distance events, but doing this type of analysis, I think it would be really interesting to look
The
at.
problem I see with getting that data, and this is just an operational thing, is the checkpoints in Ironman are just arbitrary, right? We're gonna have a split at 12 miles, we'll
Yeah,
have one at
yeah,
16 miles, and then we'll have one at 18 miles because there's a little
yeah.
out and back. We got to make sure nobody cheats. These
Hmm.
guys were getting every 5K because
Yeah, right.
at these major marathons, they take the splits every 5K.
Yeah.
And so I think it would be more difficult, but someone could pull the data off of Strava potentially,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
break it down. Like it would be a lot of work. But I mean, John, we've all been to Ironman. We've all been to half Ironman. I think it's more ubiquitous where we see this. And there's a term, right? The Ironman shuffle,
Yeah, right.
right? And if you're watching the finishers of an Ironman from like 9:30,
Hmm.
9 hours and 30 minutes all the way till midnight,
Yeah.
um,
The death march.
the death march, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
and the worst place to go watch, from my understanding, is like mile 20.
Hmm.
mile 22, 23, like where you were having
Yeah,
your issue 23, like because that's where it tends to happen.
yeah,
And and so the question that I think ultimately, we would like to answer, or I'd like to answer, is how do we prevent it?
yeah, right. Mm.
Because think about in your race, like that last 3 miles, how much time did it take you?
Oh, yeah, that one I don't remember, but it was probably at least 15 minute per mile.
So you were probably, I know your pace is pretty well. So you were probably like 6, 7 per mile coming into that
Yeah,
point, right?
yeah.
So you slowed down by 100%.
Yeah, well, and that's what I liked about this big data analysis is he defined hitting the wall as, just like you said, a significant drop in pace in the second half. And so he has all these data from, the 5K sections, and
Yep.
was able to start spotting when these people started, or when these runners started having this drop in pace. And there's still a little bit of, squishiness in terms of how much drop, but I think he operationally defined it as slowing down for an extended period during the second half of the race. So still a little bit of wiggle room and exactly what that meant. But the results were really pretty interesting in terms of men versus women
Oh yeah,
hitting the
men are way
wall.
worse.
Yeah, the men are far worse in hitting the wall than women.
I have a complete theory on it.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Men are idiots. Women tend to stick to the plan.
I don't think that's a theory, but okay.
So
That's a law.
I could just tell you though, the triathletes I know that are women, they do a lot better job, in my
Yeah,
experience, of sticking to a race plan,
yeah, yeah,
sticking to
yeah.
a fueling plan, a race plan.
Hmm.
Men, that testosterone, oh man, it gets in the way, and it's like,
Hmm.
oh, we've talked about this before. Today's my day.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Oh,
That's
I
right.
kept up with so and so on the bike. Oh,
Yeah.
we went to T2 at the same time.
Gotta let the magic
Boom.
happen.
It's happening, man. I'm gonna stay with this guy because I
Yeah,
feel good because today's my day.
yeah.
Hey, today's not your day. You know what? You tapered.
That's right.
That's all. You feel good because you tapered.
Yeah,
And we get it. We run into this problem all the time. But you're
yeah,
right, John. It was so interesting. Like the numbers, it's like 10% greater
yeah.
men to females on bonk.
Hmm. Well, and not only that, were males more likely to hit the wall or bonk than females were, but the effect on the pace was bigger too.
But it wasn't much bigger, but it was
No,
bigger.
it
It
wasn't,
was
but
like a
yeah,
minute. It
yeah,
was like
yeah,
a minute bigger, but still,
yeah.
it was bigger. But the interesting thing was women tended to hit it first,
Hmm.
but not by much.
Yeah.
But but I think just the pure number was interesting. And next time we go out to an Ironman and watch, I'm going to be paying attention to women kind of keeping that pace going and men walking.
Yeah, yeah, right, right. No, that's true. And then the last point that I wrote down that I liked from the results was the effect of bonking on pace was bigger for the faster athletes.
Yeah,
So
but I think when you go from running a 5 minute K
yeah, right.
to walking compared to running a 10 minute K and walking,
That's the big, yeah.
that I think that's the thing, because I think that it ends up being a lot of walking, and walking speeds are about the same.
Well, and those are some anecdotes in terms of, rules to follow for an iron distance marathon. In terms of, if you're running, oh, now I can't remember the rule off the top of my head, but it's like, every minute that you are trying to save, or run faster in the beginning of the race, you're going to pay with multiple minutes at the end of the race. And so the whole point being, don't go out fast in an Ironman because you're going to pay the big price near the second half or the end of the marathon.
So yeah, it's so interesting, right? Like I can't tell you how many people that I've worked with and talked to about this very thing, about going easy even in a
Mhm.
half
Yeah,
Ironman, right? Can you negative split it? Oh no, I couldn't. I fatigue too much at the end. Well,
yeah,
why?
right.
There's research really good on running, and if you run an even pace, it's the
Hmm.
best,
Hmm.
right? But the number of people that can negative split a half Ironman or an Ironman is like there's only a handful,
No,
right?
that's right.
And they tend to be pros. Well,
Hmm.
why?
Yeah.
Right? It's everybody that I've ever talked to about this, I'm like, hey, you know what? That first 2 or 3K,
Hmm.
your goal should be those are the slowest 2 or 3K of your run. And we
That's
all
right.
make this, we all make the cardinal sin of those first 2 or 3K, those being your fastest.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Oh man, I put them in the bank. They're
Yeah.
done. Right. And yeah, you put them in the bank, but the bank is coming back with interest.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Yeah. Now Chip is helping us out. He posted in the comments 10 to 15 seconds faster comes out to 10 to 15 minutes slower. I
yeah,
love that. That's great.
yeah. And and Chip is completely 100% right. And Chip has a tremendous amount of experience in running and running marathons, and he knows what he's talking about here. But it's hard to convince people
Yeah.
that today's not their day,
Right.
right? And I keep going back to that. You are what you've trained,
Yeah.
right? If you've trained to run a 145 half marathon and you go out at 130 pace,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, good for you. Your
Yeah.
first 10K
Right.
split is going to be awesome. And then you're walking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's a really hard thing to do. And especially if you haven't done it before.
Yeah. Right.
Once you've
Uh,
paid that price a few times,
oh,
you learn.
okay. So now that was the other interesting part of this paper is like you described earlier. He also was able to get data for a subset of runners, and he was able to identify their personal best.
Yeah.
And so, what was really odd is their personal best came after they experienced hitting the wall.
Then it was within 3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And to
So
me,
there's
that
some good news there.
there's good news. We're dumb, but we're not that dumb,
Yeah.
right?
But,
So, and I'll speak from personal experience. I've only completed one Ironman, and I at mile 16 fell apart.
mm-hmm.
I went out too quick, and I felt good, and I felt today's my day.
Mm-hmm.
But as I prepare for my next one, I guarantee you I will not run that first
Yeah,
5K too
yeah.
fast.
Right,
I
right.
guarantee you I won't, because I paid for it. And that last 10 miles was a death march, and
Yeah.
I never want to experience that again.
Mm-hmm.
And even in half marathons off in 70.3s, I've done it. I've went out too fast and paid the
Yeah.
price.
Mm-hmm.
And Chip is 100% right. It's like a tenfold,
Yeah,
right?
right, right.
Like I can't tell you, even in our age groups, John, like the amount of people that can run like under a 145 half marathon.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at like it's like the top 10
Yeah, right.
run under 145. So, and I'm stupid. I used to be stupid. Like, why do I feel like I can run a 125?
Right.
I don't need to. Just run a 135. It's gonna
Yeah.
be instead of running the 145 because you blew up, just run the 135 and call it a day.
Yeah. No, that's right. No, and you're spot on. And what's interesting in this data set again, I'm just so blown away by 4 million records. This issue of bonking was pretty much age independent. I mean, you're not you're not immune
Well, the
nor
very young was the highest for men. It was
yeah
43%, and the least was 50 to 54. So I guess no, if it was 45 to 49, but
yeah.
basically 45 to 54 was the lowest.
Everybody is susceptible to
But everyone's susceptible.
it. And fatigue is inevitable, and
Yeah.
it was something like an Ironman, iron distance race, or half Ironman, or even I mean, every race, a sprint, Olympic, doesn't matter. Your fatigue is inevitable. It's just how much are you going to have, and are you going to be reduced to walking or trying to survive, as described in that other paper.
Yeah. The other one I'd like to share is you're not your PR,
How
right?
so? What do you?
So many people that I talk to and like, oh, you know what? My PR in the half Ironman on the 70.3 is 130.
Mhm.
And 2 or 3 years later, they're like, well, I could do a 130. I'm like, but you haven't trained like you trained then, and you're slower now. And that's okay. So when you pace yourself and you get off the bike, you're a 135 guy now. You're not a 130 guy, even though, yeah, that was your PR and good for
Yeah.
you, but you are who you are today.
Mm-hmm.
And triathletes and runners are notorious. Oh, when I was 40, I did this. Well,
Yeah.
you're 50 now,
Yeah.
and you're not the same person you were then. So don't pace yourself.
I love this. And actually, Chip adds a comment. I still do that sometimes with a bonking with age, because he thinks he's 45, but he's 55,
Yep.
and that's
Oh, it's funny you said
exactly.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of this too. I told the start line, I'm always trying to convince myself I'm still 29.
Yeah. And you're not. And especially when
No.
the paces start coming early on the watch and you're like, oh yeah, good. Like that's my PR time. That's good. I remember that. I remember seeing those numbers that year.
That's
And
right.
it's 10 years ago.
No, that's
And
right.
you're not that guy. And it's a hard pill to swallow, as you know, as we age.
Yeah, no, it is. And Bob does add, wait until you're hit 65. And yeah, it just, but that's why I love, the stories of people who are the oldest athletes in a race, because I mean that's a testament to just grit, I hope someday I am the oldest athlete in a race, and I certainly won't be the fastest, but that would be neat
That's
to
the
be the
goal.
oldest at that point. So, but
So
you
we
have to adjust. You do have to adjust your expectations. You got to adjust your pacing plan. And you're right. Now I understand what you're saying is, there's no way that I'm going to run a PR, at 58 anymore. No, I'm just not going to. 5K, 10K marathon. It's not going to. I'm not going to PR because I've raced back when I was younger.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Bob also adds a point, and this is what you were saying earlier. There's not as much research on this topic for an Ironman as a marathon, because now you have the whole complicating factor of the bike and the swim that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before, over biking leading to this problem.
Hmm.
You overbike and then you start your overrunning and then you're getting more trouble.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about pacing, which I think is awesome, right? Because that really is the magic sauce to me.
Hmm.
But the other magic sauce is fueling. And
Yeah.
because once again, your pace can be perfect.
Hmm.
If you don't have the fuel, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Because in these long distance races, even in Olympic distance racing, you can drastically mess up your fueling, and it's not just the fueling on the day; it's coming in with your fuel tanks full.
It's the days leading up, and not from a carbo loading classic perspective. It's the days leading up that will still influence what happens on race day.
And I'd say it's not the carb loading as much as it's not depleting the carbs,
Hmm.
right? Like, uh, you know, I do a bike ride the day
Okay.
before a race. So 70.3, I always do a bike ride. And it's just get out, open up the legs a little, like a few sprints. I might spend 40 minutes, just especially if it's a travel race, make sure the bike's working good. But man, I am taking on tons of carbs as I'm going. I don't want to lower the tank at all. And
Yeah. Right. Right.
I'm not going super fast or anything, but I make sure I got like 2 Gatorades going for that 40
Hmm.
minutes because I don't want to be depleted.
Yep. Right.
And all day long, I'm not loading. I'm just trying to, like, whatever I'm burning, I'm trying to replace.
Hmm.
I'm walking around the expo, talking to people. My mind is working. The mind uses blood
Yep.
sugar.
Yep.
I'm trying to replace it. Depending on your size, you hold different amounts of carbohydrates in reserve.
And
But
training.
yeah,
Hmm.
but the number is, you can kind of hold around, depending on size, between 1,400 and 1,600 calories
Hmm.
in your liver and in your muscles.
Right.
And that's if you're fully fueled, ready to go race.
And that's going to get you about a 10K.
Well, maybe a little bit longer than that
Yeah.
if you're fully fueled, right?
Hmm.
And really it depends on pace.
Hmm.
The faster you go, the more you burn. But let's just say, hypothetically, say you've got 1,500 calories on board, or potential, but you didn't prepare properly, and so instead you're a little bit carb depleted before you go to bed. So maybe you're at 1,200 calories, and then in the morning, well, you get a nervous stomach, so you don't really eat that much. By the time you get to the start, let's say you're at 1,000 calories. Then you
Right.
jump
Right.
in the water and you swim for a half hour.
Yeah. Right.
Get out at now you got 600 calories reserve left. And then because it's your day and you're feeling good and because you're tapered, so you actually feel good for
That's
once,
right.
you bike that first hour without taking on anything because, oh man,
Hmm.
I'm feeling good. I don't need any
Yeah.
calories.
Right.
And now you're at zero.
Mm-hmm.
right? So let's say during that bike, you start eating, and but you can never out eat your what you're putting out. You just can't. So you're just barely hanging on, barely hanging on, barely hanging on. Then you start your run and you're at zero again.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're at every aid station taking a gel at every aid station, and it's not being metabolized as you talked about earlier. You can't win. You can't
Right.
you just can't win. And so we talked about having a pace plan, but you have to have a nutrition plan that starts, like you said, 2 days before at least.
Mm-hmm. No, I love this, but it's we got to unpack a few things here.
Yeah, there was a lot there, but
There is.
that's the
So
general story.
you're going down the path of explaining bonking from a cardiovascular anaerobic model, where it's a fuel substrate issue. Now we know there's other things,
Yeah.
but right now, I mean, we're focusing on the fuel part, and that bonking is because of a low fuel availability.
Low carbohydrate
Yeah, a
availability.
low carbohydrate, and partly because the brain really survives on or uses carbohydrate as a fuel, and so that's when you start, looking at those symptoms of hitting the wall, like lightheadedness, even or confusion.
Dizziness. I mean, I get tunnel vision. I
Yeah,
get
yeah,
total
right,
tunnel
right.
vision, and
You're
I have to walk. When it
okay,
gets to a
yeah,
certain point, I don't have an option anymore. Like my body
mhm,
will just say, you know what, that's it. You're
right,
walking. I can't out. I can fight it for a little while,
yeah.
but eventually the walk is going to
Yeah,
win.
and yeah, and along with that, then you just don't have the ability to make good decisions at that time. This is why, I often I've gotten lost on courses because you just can't make a decision. It just you've got to you got to have a big sign there, go this way, and if you don't, and you've got to decide, wait, was I supposed to make a left? Was I supposed to go this way? And so yeah, that's a tough time, but there is the model, and we were talking about this before we hit record and started, is the whole central governor model.
Yep.
And this is a really interesting model that sort of incorporates a lot of different ideas, but doesn't blame any single idea because you never know what the day is going to hold. And it could be, one reason or the other for one day or the other. And so the central governor model is, do you want to go through it? I know you were talking about it.
I
It's,
got it. I got it right here. So let me read the notes.
uh,
Hang on one second. They call it the what do you call it? Is it the neuromuscular fatigue model?
yeah,
No,
yeah, that's the other
no, sorry.
way. Yep,
So sorry, it's basically in the central governor model. Noakes and Ulmer argue that exercise performance is controlled by a governor located in the central nervous system, which uses signals and feedback from muscles and other organs to regulate exercise performance in order to protect vital organs from injury or damage.
yep, yep. So it's classic Noakes model, and it's a great model. I teach this in my physiology of endurance performance class, and a governor. I, you know, I think back to our school bus days. Did you ever ride a school bus?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I remember talking with the bus driver one day. I don't know why I was talking with the bus driver, and he was talking about how his bus had a governor on it. I said, "Well, what's a governor?" He says, "Well, I can only make this bus go so fast. No matter how much I push on this gas pedal, it's going to cut off at this speed." I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. I guess that makes sense for a school bus. You don't want it going too fast." And this is what this central governor model is really predicated on: is the brain has some governor that the brain is monitoring, and then it starts to control what the muscles do. And the trick is, what is the brain monitoring? And so Noakes talks about a glucostat, which, it's not a glucostat, but just to phrase it, monitoring the level of blood glucose available, thermostat, hydrostat. I mean, he has all these different ideas that the brain is monitoring, and if your heart or other organs are starting to get into danger, the brain is going to say, no, we're going to start shutting things down, even though the muscle may still be able to generate force, which is why I could run,
Yep.
at the end of an Ironman, or if a gun goes off, to startle you, sometimes you can still generate, enough muscle force to do some exercise. So it's a neat model, but it doesn't always explain exactly what is going on.
Yeah. Well, I think that it does encompass what we're talking about, right? It encompasses overpacing, which is
Hmm.
causing extra stress to the system, and underfueling, which causes
Yeah.
extra stress to the system,
Yeah.
regardless of temperature, regardless of everything else. And
Hmm.
but it's super. I mean, this is tough. This is tough stuff.
Well, okay, so now, but both you and I have used blood glucose monitors now during different races. And it is interesting how I cannot put my finger on that blood glucose level and say that's where I ran into problems. And so this is
But
why
but I can.
you can?
I absolutely can.
Oh, how so? Tell,
So
tell.
I have rebound hypoglycemia.
Okay.
And so what that basically means is when I start exercising, if I have carbohydrates before I exercise, I basically will get hyperglycemic, so
Mm-hmm.
too much blood glucose that'll cause insulin basically
Yep.
to spike, drive blood sugar into my muscle cells. Then I start to exercise, and then exercise drives blood glucose into my muscle cells, and I'll go from 140 millimoles per deciliter
Yeah.
to 70 in like 10 minutes.
Mm. Wow.
And and so I wore that. Actually, I have a prescription for my next one. I got to go get it tomorrow.
Mm.
Um, it happened this morning to me,
Wow.
and I'll just I did a big bike ride yesterday, and we were going to go for a run this morning, and I knew I didn't have enough time last night to eat enough.
Yeah.
I just fell asleep, and I know I didn't have enough carbs. So like the morning, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have a big bowl of oatmeal.
Mm-hmm.
Big bowl of oatmeal, put some jam in it, put some brown sugar in it, and I'm like, okay, I'm feeling good. And I know
Mm-hmm.
my blood sugar was high because I can tell, I
Okay.
can feel it. So we start running, and at 5K in, and I can run, like I can run 5K no problem, right? Like
Yeah.
this is not
Great.
a. I had to walk. I stopped. I called my wife, and I'm like, Marie, you have to come and bring me some sugar.
Mm.
And I know my blood glucose at that time was probably in the 70s because I've measured it
Yeah.
when
Great.
when that
Great.
happens. And so even during training sessions, especially, I can tell
Mm.
when that's getting to that point. And it's super interesting that it happens like that. Now, when I've been well fueled and kept track
Yep.
of stuff, I can hold it steady as long as I'm constantly bringing in glucose or
Yep.
sorry, glycogen. No, it's glucose at that point, sucrose, glucose at that point. As long as I'm bringing in sugar, I'm fine. It's when
Yeah.
I bring in and then I don't have more.
I'm just curious, have you ever tried to swish and spit and see if that works?
I haven't with the monitor because when I get to 70, I feel so horrible.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's it must work to a certain extent because it actually happens swimming quite often, and mostly because I swim at night, I think. So I have some food, and then so I got to get out, and if I have 10 jelly beans is all it
Yep.
takes. And then my blood sugar goes back up, and I'm fine for the rest of practice.
Interesting. Yeah, right, right,
And that's
right.
only 40 calories.
Yeah, right. No, that's interesting. Well,
So,
okay, so there's a line of research that I'm referring to here with the switch and spit, and you're familiar with this, where they've looked at the influence on performance of taking in carbohydrate but not digesting it at all, swishing it in your mouth for maybe 10 seconds and then spitting it back out.
but
And
that shouldn't
performance,
change blood. But that shouldn't change blood sugar.
no, exactly, it shouldn't. But performance is improved.
Is improved. Yeah.
And so this is why that central governor model comes back. This is where it comes back into play, because something happened that the brain detected, glucose that's going to get to the system, or it thinks it's going to get to the system, but it never does. And then the brain is able to, in that case, override and then have an increase in performance. That's what's so
Yeah.
weird about this,
But
physiological and
but I,
psychology.
but I would contend that if your blood glucose was at a critical point,
Hmm.
and it truly was blood
Yeah.
glucose stopping you, that wouldn't work.
That's why this is your experiment. This is your
I'm gonna do
assignment.
it. I'm gonna do it.
You're gonna,
But I will absolutely do it because it happens unfortunately like once a week for me.
and then when Marie comes out and brings you the sugar, say, stay with me
I gotta
because
spit it
I'm
out.
just gonna switch it in and spit it out. I might be passing out down the road here.
I might be passing out down the road. And honestly, it's super scary. It really,
Yeah, it
it
is.
really is
It is.
scary.
Yeah.
Like when I get the tunnel vision, but
Yeah.
for me, as long as I stop, like as long as I walk or I stop, I'm okay. Like,
Yeah.
and I've done it with that where I've had the continuous glucose monitor on. If I stop and just walk, my
Right.
blood sugar slowly goes back up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And but the quick fix is like today, I put it got a gel. I'm running in a minute and a half, 2 minutes,
Yeah.
back to the
Interesting.
same pace.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what I'm saying is like I think that what you're saying is true as far if something's not absolutely physiologically the reason,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if you get to the point where you're so dehydrated, another one, or
Mm-hmm.
overheated,
Yeah.
and that's the thing that causes you to stop, swishing is not going to help.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
swishing cold water might,
Mm-hmm.
with the overheated, right? With central
Yeah.
governor theory.
Well, but this is, this is the big debate in terms of what causes someone to stop or even slow down.
Yep.
And that it's not always explainable from a physiological or mechanical manner. And this is why the central governor model continues to persist, is that the mind is there, which is on one hand can be a good thing, but it can also work against you. There's stories of athletes on the previous post that I posted about what we're going to talk about. Someone mentions, and I don't want to get too much into the name, but an endurance athlete to an extreme, who wrote a book about going to the edge over and over and again, to the point where it's dangerous. And there are athletes that can change that governor in your brain. And in fact, that's part of sometimes what the taper is, I think, doing is it's adjusting what that governor is. So the school bus can't just go to 55, but you adjust the governor to go to 60. So, I mean, the brain is a big part of this whole discussion, and we don't know how much at times. And there may be one factor that's overwhelming on certain days. It could be heat, could be hydration, like you're talking about, it could be low blood glucose as well.
I love the fact you bring up the taper because as triathletes, I think we're always having a governor. And
Hmm.
that's for me, my legs are always a little bit sore.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? During a training block, my legs
Hmm.
are always a little bit sore and I can't push it as hard as I'd like to at any point.
Yeah,
But if I taper, you're right. I've changed the governor.
yeah,
It's funny. I've never thought of it quite
yeah,
like that. Like I've actually changed the set point because my legs
yeah.
aren't sore anymore.
Hmm.
And so I can actually go a little bit harder.
Hmm.
That's a really interesting point
Yeah,
you bring
yeah,
up.
no, and it's shown up in different research papers as well. All right, I gotta get caught up on some comments here. So we were talking about being the oldest athlete in race, and Chip says, "Hey, getting close, John." Okay, yeah, I'm 58. Okay, we still have some athletes in our club that are really, really killing it in their 70s. I love it, 60s and 70s. That's so fantastic. It's inspiring. Okay, so yeah, Chip adds, know your heart rate or power on the days that are extremes, hit, heat, wind, etc. And that's a really great point. Is sometimes you got to get away from your own perception, and you do need to use, some of the metrics that you have available to you from your power meter
Yeah,
or your heart rate.
I'd like to add that into that one for there's lots of these calculators for especially power on
Yeah,
the bike.
yeah.
So for me, like power on the bike, I look at my last 30 days worth of data before a
Mm-hmm.
race, and I pull my FTP from those last 30 days of training, not doing an FTP test,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I take that as the number that I build my training or my race pace off of,
Yeah.
because if I go fresh into, once again, if I take 2 days off or 3 days off and then do an FTP test, my FTP is going to be significantly higher. But
Interesting.
that's me on 2 or 3 days rest. That's not me every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. All right. So yeah, and then Chip says he wants Super Sapiens, which is another continuous blood glucose monitor, which I think we're going to see more and more of.
If
Sort of,
the FDA
yeah,
clears that.
yeah,
Yeah.
sort of getting the idea, and we talked about this on a previous podcast, is trying to have a fuel gauge available that you can make some decisions for fueling. And
Well, I think it's super interesting, right? So we have a few gauges that we can use, right? So the continuous glucose monitor is one that once again is starting to happen.
mm-hmm,
We're seeing pros race with it with live data. with Super Sapiens. We've both raced with them, and then the core temperature measurements,
Yeah. Yeah.
which we could do live. I mean, that's providing another window, right? It's another gauge. So if you can keep your glucose level to where you're optimal, and then also keep your temperature to where you're optimal,
Yeah.
you'll probably have the best possible race, honestly.
I see some machine learning algorithms coming into play here.
Yeah.
It's because you're right. It's you got to take in all these data points, and then you ultimately need to be able to make a decision in terms of what impacts performance. All right, Matt asks, and we were talking about leading up to the race. What are some good things to eat prior to an event to build up your fuel storage?
Man, so Matt stayed with me before on races, and he maybe seen some of it, but it's kind of individualistic because, and so it depends. And to me, it always depends on your gastrointestinal system,
Yeah.
right? Like for me personally, I I've had lots of GI issues as far as diarrhea, and so I have to be really careful about fiber the 2 days before.
Yeah.
So I try and find good sources of carbohydrates that are they don't have much fiber. So cereal, like
Yeah.
Captain Crunch, is one of my go-tos.
Oh yeah, that's right.
There's no fiber in Captain Crunch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Some people like pretzels because they eat the salt content as well. There's no fiber in pretzels. So I also like sweet potatoes. There's not, especially if you do the cook. How do you do it? You cook them, cool them, heat them up again. It decreases the fiber content.
Twice baked sweet
Twice baked,
potatoes.
twice baked sweet potatoes. So I think that if you don't have any GI issues at all, I think it opens up more foods.
Yeah, I love it. And whenever I think of the question, I think you're spot on. There is a high level of individuality here, and you got it. And unfortunately, we've got to just try to figure it out because I think back to Paula Newby Frazier, who was asked that question after one of her whatever number Ironman she won. She said, "What's the best pre-race meal?" And she said, "Well, I had pizza yesterday, so I guess that's it."
If you think about it, the pizza was probably had very little fiber in it.
Yeah, right.
And
Right. Well, it depends on what's on your pizza too.
well,
So
yeah, but even like tomato sauce, probably not a
yeah,
lot. Even with a little bit of vegetables, probably not. But and it's interesting, right? Like you have to almost think of the unhealthy choices.
yeah, right.
Right. So, you're gonna have toast with your breakfast. Would you like wheat toast or white toast? Normally, as a health conscious athlete, I need to have
Yeah.
wheat toast because it's healthier. Not today.
Mm-hmm.
Not the day before the race. You're gonna have rice. You want wild rice, brown rice, or white rice? The day of the race or the day before the race, you want white rice.
Yeah, right.
Even though we wouldn't historically think of those as the healthier options because they don't have fiber,
Yeah.
and that's the reason they're not considered as healthy. So that's the one. I think that's a big thing: is get your carbohydrates without having too much fiber.
And Chip wrote right as you were talking about that. He got the comment in right before. He said, "Day before race, no fiber and no processed carbs." Now, we do need to just give a little bit of shout out because we do have an athlete out there, another Matt, who is able to race successfully without relying on carbohydrates. And that's a whole nother topic. And I know that there's been this, low carb, high fat movement that happened many years ago. And there's still some evidence for being able to do that, but it's that I think requires a whole nother podcast.
That is a deep dive into something that is no, and there are people that they can train and they can do that, but for the average person, that's not a.
But I like what Chip adds in here in terms of processed carbs. Is now you start like you're talking about your sweet potatoes.
But I still have my Captain Crunch. That's processed?
Yeah, there you go.
White bread.
Wait, Captain Crunch is processed?
Exactly, white bread processed. I think you'd be very careful of like candy, but not. And once again, I think it depends.
Yeah.
And maybe for me, like wearing the glucose monitor the day before is also an interesting one. Like I tried really hard the last time I did it to try and keep level that day, right? To not have any big ups or downs.
Right.
And I think we've talked about it before. My wife makes these awesome cookies for me, and she bakes them by the hundreds.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And we've kind of tweaked the recipe that doesn't cause a blood sugar spike
Oh,
from.
cool.
And but there's a little bit, there's a little bit of fiber in them, but not a lot, just a little
Yeah.
bit of oats. And that's another one for me personally, is like we've come up with a recipe that doesn't cause my blood sugar to go up. And we did it with a continuous glucose monitor.
Interesting. That's great. And so, yeah, so now these devices are becoming more available for us and we can make those decisions. All right, I want to try to wrap up with one
Yep.
slightly different topic, but going back to where we reviewed, we talked about that paper by Smith, where the personal best in the marathon in this case came after someone had hit the wall the worst. And so there's a bright light. And
Yep.
so, something that I think is really important is that, sometimes people struggle in a race and maybe they even DNF. Your career is not over. DNFs happen to everyone. Bad races happen to everyone. I think you can learn from that and then come back, recover, and have a different strategy, whether it's fueling, whether it's pacing, whatever it is, and then actually have a PR, personal best, or really have a stellar race at that point. So there is hope.
Yeah. I'm going to add one more little anecdote. So have you ever heard people say this after a race? Oh, I just got to buckle down and train harder.
Yeah, right, right.
Right. But then on the same context, I overtrained.
Yeah, right.
Well, how are you ever you got to fail sometimes, right? Like
You do.
to find that spot for the individual person is super, super hard. Even if you're working with a high level coach who's on top of their game, there's going to be times where you overtrain.
Yep.
There's going to be times when you could have trained harder. And I mean, this is an art form, like mastering the training and the racing of a triathlon is, and honestly, I think that's why we're addicted to it is.
Oh, I love it. And that's why that DNF sometimes gives you that information of you took a risk.
Yep.
Okay. But now you need to adjust things to avoid that risk of leading to a DNF or to, that dramatic drop in pacing that you're doing that Ironman shuffle. It's
and maybe the risk is worth it sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're going for a Kona spot and that you get someone tracking and you're in 7th spot and there's four slots, and it's like when someone says, hey, you're in 7th, and you push hard for the next 5K and you blow up. Well, you weren't gonna make the slot anyways.
Yeah, right.
So maybe it's worth the risk.
Yeah.
Right. And you would never know. And then you can't be all upset. Oh, I DNF because I blew up on the run, or I bonked. Yep. Well, yeah, you did it, but you took the risk. Because ultimately we are racing.
That's right. That's right. And so, so I always, sometimes people are a little down on themselves if something like that happens. And really, that's just the maturing of an athlete. And again, this paper speaks to it, is that, the majority of athletes hit their personal best after their worst hitting the wall.
Yep.
So,
and that's the perfect lesson to learn here, right? It's like it's only the person that keeps doing it over and over and over again.
That's right.
Like that's the person you got to shake your head at. It's like, oh man, I've done this 7 times in a row. I've bonked at mile 20.
You gotta learn a little bit. So.
Or
at least make different mistakes. So.
At least make different mistakes.
All right. Well, I'm hungry now.
Oh yeah, me too. You're talking about glucose,
right.
Glycogen. So John, thanks so much once again for meeting on a Saturday. And man, we had a good group of people watching on a Saturday night. That's awesome.
We did.
The triathletes are perfect, right? Because we all got to get up and train tomorrow. So it's 7 o'clock on a Saturday. We probably have our best audience right now. They trained hard today and they're going to train hard again tomorrow.
That's right. That's right. Love it. All right. Well, hey, good talking.
Yep. Thanks, John. Hey, have a great training week.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Great comments.